Title: You versus You, The Journey of Becoming Your Best Self. Hello and welcome. Today, you will listen to a special English story called You versus You, The Journey of Becoming Your Best Self. This story is written in clear and slow English to help learners at the B1, B2 level improve listening, vocabulary, and comprehension. The story follows Daniel, a young man who feels lost and unsure about his life. He struggles with self-doubt, fear, and emotions. But step by step, he learns that the greatest challenge is not with the world, it is with himself. The story uses everyday expressions and emotional vocabulary that you can also use in your own life. So, listen carefully, learn naturally, and enjoy the journey. Now, let's begin. Daniel sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the wall. It was early morning, but he didn't feel fresh. The sun was shining through the window, and the world outside looked alive. But inside, Daniel felt heavy. Every day seemed the same: wake up, go to work, come back tired, and repeat. There was nothing exciting, nothing new. He worked at a small office in the city. The job paid the bills, but it did not make him happy. He typed emails, answered phone calls, and sat in long meetings. He smiled when people spoke to him, but deep inside, he felt empty. Sometimes, he asked himself, is this all there is to life? Just work, eat, sleep, and repeat? That question never left his mind. Daniel lived alone in a small apartment. At first, living alone felt like freedom, but after 2 years, it became silent and lonely. The walls did not talk. The rooms were quiet. When he came home from work, he only heard the sound of his own footsteps. His evenings were always the same. He cooked something simple: rice, pasta, or eggs. He watched television without really watching. Sometimes he scrolled through his phone for hours. He looked at pictures of people traveling, smiling, and living exciting lives. And every time, he felt smaller. Why am I not like them? He whispered to himself. Why do I feel stuck? One night, after a long day at work, Daniel stood in front of the mirror. His reflection stared back at him, tired eyes, messy hair, and a weak smile. He didn't like what he saw. Not just his face, but the person inside. He saw a man who once had dreams, but now only had routines. A man who wanted to change, but didn't know how. That night, something inside him broke. Or maybe, something inside him woke up. Daniel whispered to the mirror, I don't hate the world, I hate myself for not trying harder. The problem is not out there. The problem is me. His voice was low, but the words felt powerful. For the first time, he admitted the truth. Lying in bed that night, Daniel could not sleep. His thoughts were loud. One voice inside him said, you are a failure. You are wasting your life. Nothing will change. Another voice answered, no. You can change. You can start again. You just need courage. It felt like two people were inside him, one pulling him down, the other trying to lift him up. The fight was not with the world. It was you versus you. Daniel turned on the light, sat up, and wrote in his notebook, my biggest enemy is not other people. It is myself, my fear, my doubt, my excuses. The next morning, Daniel woke up earlier than usual. The sky was still pink, and the city was quiet. For a moment, he felt peace. He made a cup of coffee and opened his notebook again. The words from last night stared at him. He read them slowly, my biggest enemy is myself. Something about those words gave him energy. They made him feel responsible. If he was the problem, then maybe he was also the solution. That morning, he made a small decision. He didn't know exactly how, but he promised himself one thing: I will not live the same way anymore. I will fight for myself. It was a small spark. But every fire begins with a spark. At the office, everything looked the same. People typed on keyboards, printers made noise, and phones kept ringing. But Daniel felt different inside. He watched his coworkers laugh about small things. For the first time, he noticed how unhappy most of them looked. Maybe he wasn't the only one struggling. Maybe everyone had their own secret battles. During lunch, a colleague asked, "Daniel, are you okay? You look different today." Daniel smiled. "I'm fine. Just thinking." His colleague nodded and went back to eating. But Daniel's mind was racing. He was not sure where this journey would take him, but he knew one thing: he could not go back to the old version of himself. That night, before sleeping, Daniel wrote one more thing in his notebook: "Today I made a choice. A small choice, but an important one. I will fight my laziness, my fear, and my excuses. I will face myself. It is you versus you, and I must win." The words were simple, but they felt like a promise. Daniel closed the notebook, turned off the light, and lay in bed. He felt nervous, but also alive. For the first time in a long time, he felt hope. The journey had just begun. The next morning, Daniel woke up earlier than usual. His alarm rang at 6 a.m. and for the first time in months, he didn't press the snooze button. Instead, he sat up in bed and took a deep breath. The room was quiet. Outside, the streets were still empty. It felt like the whole city was still asleep. This silence gave him space to think. He remembered the promise he had written in his notebook the night before: "It is you versus you, and I must win." The words repeated in his head like an echo. Daniel didn't know exactly what to do, but he knew he had to start somewhere. He put on his old sneakers and stepped outside. The air was cool and fresh. He walked slowly at first, then a little faster. His legs felt heavy, but his mind felt lighter. He passed by a bakery. The smell of fresh bread filled the street. He saw a man opening his shop and sweeping the floor. He noticed small details that he usually ignored: the sound of birds, the colors of the sunrise, the smile of an old woman carrying groceries. For the first time in a long while, Daniel felt present. He wasn't thinking about yesterday or tomorrow. He was simply here, in this moment. That short walk gave him energy. When he returned home, he wrote in his notebook, "The first step doesn't have to be big. Even a small walk can make me feel alive." Later that day at work, Daniel thought about change. He realized something important: wanting to change was easy, but living differently was hard. The human mind loves comfort. It loves habits, even when they are unhealthy. And Daniel's habits were strong: sleeping late, eating junk food, spending hours on his phone, and avoiding challenges. He asked himself, how do I fight my own habits? How do I fight myself? The answer came slowly. Not with big plans, but with small steps. One change at a time. One choice at a time. At lunch, Daniel sat with his colleague Mark. Mark was older, in his 40s, and often gave advice. He noticed Daniel looked thoughtful. "What's on your mind, Daniel?" Mark asked. Daniel hesitated. Then he said, "I'm tired of living the same life every day. I want to change, but I don't know where to start." Mark smiled. "You don't have to change everything in one day. Start with one thing. Do it every day. Then add another. Small steps create big results." Those words stayed with Daniel. Small steps create big results. That evening, he wrote it in his notebook. The next morning, Daniel tried to wake up early again. But this time, his body didn't want to move. His mind whispered, "Just stay in bed. You can start tomorrow." It was a battle inside his head. One voice said, "Sleep." The other said, "Get up." He closed his eyes for a moment, then suddenly jumped out of bed. He stood by the window, breathing heavily, like he had just fought a war. And in a way, he had. That small victory felt powerful. He realized that change wasn't about fighting the world. It was about winning these small battles against himself. Every morning, it would be you versus you. Daniel started using his notebook every day. It became his personal space, a place to talk to himself honestly. One page read, "Today I walked for 15 minutes. I felt fresh." Another page read, I fought the voice that told me to stay in bed. I won today. The notebook became more than paper. It became a mirror for his thoughts, a reminder of his progress. Whenever he felt weak, he opened it and saw his own words. And those words pushed him forward. One evening, after his walk, Daniel sat in a small park. Children were playing. Parents were talking. The sky turned orange as the sun set. Daniel closed his eyes and listened. For the first time in years, he felt a small glimpse of joy. Not excitement, not extreme happiness, but simple, quiet joy. It was a soft voice inside him saying, "This is life. Simple, ordinary, but still beautiful. You just need to see it." He wrote later in his notebook, "Happiness is not somewhere far. It is in small steps, in small moments, in choosing to be alive." As days passed, Daniel's mornings changed. He walked every day. Sometimes 10 minutes, sometimes 30. He wasn't fast, but he was steady. He also started eating better. Instead of fast food, he cooked simple meals, vegetables, rice, soup. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. And slowly, his mind began to change. He noticed he complained less. He noticed he smiled more, even when no one was watching. His life was still ordinary, but it felt lighter. Daniel realized, change is not about giant leaps. It is about small steps, every day. And the first step always begins inside me. Before sleeping one night, Daniel opened his notebook and wrote a final line, "I am not fighting the world. I am fighting myself, my excuses, my fear, my laziness. Every small step is a victory. And every victory brings me closer to the person I want to be." He closed the notebook, turned off the light, and whispered, "Tomorrow, I fight again. Tomorrow, it's still you versus you." And with that thought, he fell asleep, this time not empty, but hopeful. Change is never a straight road. At first, Daniel felt strong. His morning walks gave him energy, his notebook gave him focus, and his new habits gave him hope. But soon, reality returned. One Monday morning, Daniel woke up late. He had forgotten to set his alarm. He rushed to work without his walk, without breakfast, and without peace. The whole day felt heavy. Emails piled up. His boss asked for extra reports. His computer froze twice. By the end of the day, Daniel felt exhausted. When he reached home, he threw his bag on the floor and collapsed onto the couch. His old habits whispered to him, "Just order fast food. Watch TV. Forget the notebook. Forget the walks. You don't need this fight." And for the first time in weeks, Daniel listened. For 3 days, Daniel skipped his morning walks. He stayed up late, scrolling on his phone. He ate unhealthy food again. His notebook stayed closed. Each day, he promised himself, "Tomorrow I will start again." But when tomorrow came, the same excuses appeared. He felt guilty, but also stuck. It was like being trapped in mud, every step forward felt heavy, and sometimes he slipped backward. One night, Daniel sat in the dark, staring at the ceiling. The voice of doubt grew louder. "See? You can't change. You always give up. You're weak. This is who you are." Daniel clenched his fists. He wanted to shout back, but the voice was inside him. How do you silence a voice that comes from your own mind? For a moment, he believed it. Maybe he wasn't strong enough. Maybe change was only for other people, people with discipline, energy, and luck. The next morning, Daniel felt heavy again. He sat on the edge of his bed, thinking about giving up, but then, his eyes fell on the notebook on his desk. He hadn't opened it in days. Slowly, he picked it up. The first page stared at him, "It is you versus you, and I must win." Those words hit him like a wave. He remembered the spark he had felt that night when he first wrote them. He remembered the hope of his first morning walk. He remembered the quiet joy in the park. And for the first time in days, he felt a small fire return. Daniel stood up. His body felt tired, but his heart wanted to try. He put on his sneakers and went outside. The morning air was cool. The city was waking up. At first, his legs were slow, but step by step, they moved faster. With each breath, he felt alive again. And with each step, he whispered to himself, I am not weak. I am not done. I can start again. When he returned home, sweat on his face and hope in his chest, he opened his notebook and wrote, falling down is not failure. Staying down is failure. Today, I stood up again. At work, Mark noticed Daniel looked tired but more focused. Rough week? Mark asked. Daniel nodded. Yeah. I fell back into old habits. I felt like giving up. Mark smiled gently. That's normal. Everyone falls. The important part is getting up. Do you know the secret, Daniel? What? Mark leaned closer. Discipline is not about never failing. It's about starting again, no matter how many times you fall. Those words felt like medicine to Daniel. He realized that his fight wasn't about perfection. It was about persistence. That evening, Daniel sat with his notebook. He wrote slowly, carefully, this week, I hit a wall. The wall was doubt, laziness, and excuses. The wall told me to stop. But today, I climbed over it. The wall will return. But every time I climb, I become stronger. He closed the notebook and smiled. It wasn't a big victory. But it was a real one. Over the next days, Daniel's thinking began to change. He no longer expected every day to be perfect. Some days would be strong. Some days would be weak, but every day was a chance to fight again. He started to see his journey like a long road with many bumps. Sometimes he would stumble. Sometimes he would fall. But as long as he kept walking, he was still moving forward. This new way of thinking gave him peace. He didn't have to be perfect. He just had to keep going. One night, before sleeping, Daniel whispered to himself, You versus you is not about winning once. It is about fighting every day. Some days I will lose. But as long as I stand up again, I am still in the fight. And with that thought, he closed his eyes. The road ahead was still long, but now he understood, setbacks were not the end. They were part of the journey. The days grew longer, and the mornings warmer. Daniel continued his walks, but now, he added a new habit, reading. Every evening, instead of scrolling endlessly on his phone, he opened a book. It wasn't a heavy book, not something complicated. It was a simple one about personal growth and small habits. The words were clear, but powerful. One line caught his attention, we are what we repeatedly do. Success is not an act, but a habit. Daniel read the line again and again. It felt like the book was talking directly to him. If his old habits had built his old life, then new habits could build a new life. One Saturday morning, Daniel walked to the park. Children were laughing, couples were jogging, and an old man sat on a bench feeding birds. Daniel sat near him. After a few minutes, the old man smiled and said, Beautiful day, isn't it? Yes, it is, Daniel replied. They started talking. The man's name was George. He was 70 years old but full of energy. He walked every day, read every night, and still painted as a hobby. Daniel asked, What's your secret? You look so alive. George chuckled. The secret? Keep moving. Keep learning. Keep creating. The day you stop is the day you start dying. Those words stayed in Daniel's mind long after he left the park. Back at home, Daniel opened his notebook and wrote, Habits create me. If I keep moving, keep learning, and keep creating, I will stay alive. Not just living, but alive. It felt like a message from life itself. Slowly, Daniel added more small habits. He drank more water. He cleaned his room every weekend. He spent less time on social media. He tried writing one positive thought each day. They were small things, but together, they created a sense of order. His life no longer felt like chaos. It felt like growth. At work, he noticed he was more focused. His boss even said, "Good job on the reports, Daniel. Keep it up." Those words gave him confidence. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was improving. One evening, his colleague Mark joined him for coffee. Daniel told him about his walks, his notebook, and the old man in the park. Mark listened carefully. "You know, Daniel, you should be proud. Most people talk about change but never do it. You're actually doing it." Daniel smiled shyly. "I still fall sometimes. I'm not perfect." Mark shook his head. "Perfection isn't the goal. Progress is. And you, my friend, are making progress." Those words warmed Daniel's heart. For the first time, he felt proud of himself. That night, Daniel lay in bed, thinking about his journey so far. He realized something important. It wasn't just about fighting laziness or fear. It was about discovering who he wanted to become. He whispered to himself, "Maybe my purpose is not to be perfect. Maybe it is simply to grow, to become better than yesterday." The thought felt light, but powerful. It gave him peace. One afternoon, Daniel received a call. It was his sister, Anna. She sounded worried. "Daniel, can you come over tomorrow? I need help with some things." Her voice was tired. Daniel agreed without asking details. When he visited the next day, he found her house messy. Anna was struggling to balance work, her 2 kids, and house chores. Seeing her so exhausted, Daniel felt a new kind of responsibility. He cleaned the kitchen, helped the kids with homework, and made dinner. Anna hugged him with tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Daniel. I really needed this." That night, Daniel realized something. His fight with himself wasn't just for him. It was also for the people around him. When he became stronger, he could help others. Back home, Daniel wrote in his notebook, "Today I helped my sister. I felt useful. I felt needed. Change is not only for me. Change is for the people I love too." He added another line, "Gratitude makes me stronger. I am thankful for my family, my health, and this chance to grow." From that day on, he started writing one thing he was grateful for every night. As the weeks passed, Daniel felt different. He walked taller. He smiled more. Even his colleagues noticed. One of them asked, "Daniel, what's your secret? You look happier these days." Daniel thought for a moment, then replied, "I started fighting myself, and winning small battles." They laughed, but Daniel knew the truth. The fight was real, and so were the victories. That night, Daniel sat by the window, looking at the city lights. The world outside was the same. But inside, something had changed. He whispered to himself, "You versus you is not only about struggle. It is also about growth, gratitude, and purpose. I am not there yet, but I am on my way." And for the first time in years, Daniel felt a quiet kind of happiness, one that came not from the outside, but from within. Life was starting to feel different for Daniel. His mornings had structure, his habits gave him balance, and his heart felt lighter. But life has a way of testing people when they begin to grow. And Daniel's test came sooner than he expected. One Friday afternoon, Daniel's boss gathered the team. "There's an opportunity," she said. "We need someone to lead a new project. It involves long hours, problem solving, and presenting to clients. It won't be easy, but it's a chance to grow. Any volunteers?" The room went silent. Most people avoided eye contact. Leading a project meant responsibility, pressure, and risk of failure. Daniel's heart raced. For a moment, a voice whispered inside him, "This is your chance." But almost immediately, another voice argued, "No, you can't do this. You're not ready. You'll embarrass yourself." It was the same battle again, you versus you. That evening, Daniel sat at his desk with his notebook. He wrote 2 columns, on the left, reasons to say no. On the right, reasons to say yes. The left side filled quickly, too risky. Too stressful. I might fail, people might laugh. The right side was shorter, a chance to grow. I can learn new skills. I promised myself to fight fear. He stared at the page for a long time. Finally, he wrote one more sentence on the right side: if I say no because of fear, I lose to myself. That sentence hit him hard. The next morning, Daniel looked in the mirror. His reflection still showed some doubt, but also determination. He whispered, I'm scared. But fear will not decide for me. On Monday, during the meeting, Daniel raised his hand. I'll do it. I'll lead the project. The room turned to look at him. His boss smiled. Good. I knew you had potential. Daniel's stomach tightened, but deep inside, he felt proud. The project was bigger than anything he had done before. He had to organize tasks, guide his team, and prepare presentations. At first, it felt overwhelming. There were endless emails, unexpected problems, and tight deadlines. At night, Daniel sometimes sat with his head in his hands, thinking, what have I done? Maybe I can't do this. But then he remembered his notebook. He wrote each night, even when tired, I am afraid, but I am learning. Every mistake is a lesson. I am fighting, and that means I am alive. One afternoon, when Daniel looked stressed, Mark came over. How's the project going? Daniel sighed. Hard. I feel like I'm drowning. Mark nodded. That's normal. Growth always feels uncomfortable at first. But remember, diamonds are made under pressure. Daniel smiled weakly. Easy for you to say. Mark laughed. No, Daniel. I've been where you are. I failed many times. But each time, I became stronger. You will too. Those words gave Daniel strength. 2 weeks later, Daniel gave his first presentation to the client. His hands were shaking at first. But as he spoke, his voice grew steady. The client nodded, asked questions, and finally said, good job. Let's continue. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. After the meeting, Daniel walked back to his desk with a quiet smile. He had survived. More than that, he had succeeded. That night, his notebook read, today I stood in front of fear and spoke anyway. I didn't win perfectly, but I won. Fear does not own me. As the project continued, Daniel became more confident. He solved problems he once thought were impossible. He guided his team with patience. He learned that leadership wasn't about being perfect, it was about being brave enough to try, and humble enough to learn. He realized something new, the fight of you versus you wasn't just about discipline. It was also about courage, choosing action even when afraid. One night, Daniel sat by the window, watching the city lights. He thought about the past weeks, the doubt, the fear, the small victories. He whispered to himself, fear will always be here. But fear is not the enemy. My enemy is giving in to fear. Courage is not the absence of fear, courage is action in spite of fear. He wrote the same words in his notebook. By the time the project ended, Daniel was not the same man who had once avoided responsibility. He was still nervous, still human, still imperfect. But he had faced fear, and grown stronger. As he closed his notebook that night, he wrote one final line for the day. The biggest battles are inside. Today, I chose courage. Today, I won against myself. And with that, Daniel smiled in the dark, ready for whatever life would test him with next. The project was finally complete. Daniel's boss congratulated him, his colleagues respected him, and for the first time in years, he felt proud of his work. He had proven to himself that he could face fear and still move forward. But soon, another kind of battle appeared. Not loud, not dramatic, quiet, invisible, and personal. After his success, people expected more from Daniel. Great job on the project, his boss said. We'll give you bigger responsibilities now. At first, Daniel felt excited. But deep inside, he also felt tired. He had been fighting for months, waking early, pushing himself, always improving. Now, instead of feeling free, he felt pressure to keep proving himself. The voice inside him returned, whispering, "What if that project was just luck? What if you fail next time?" This time, the enemy wasn't laziness. It was pressure and self-doubt. One evening, Daniel sat with his notebook. He wrote honestly, "I am proud, but also afraid. I don't want to fall back. I don't want to disappoint others. I don't want to disappoint myself." As he looked at the words, he realized something. He had been fighting so hard to win against his weaknesses that he forgot another part of the battle, the fight to rest, to breathe, to be kind to himself. The next weekend, Daniel returned to the park where he once met George, the old man. This time, George was painting a small canvas of the sunrise. "Back again?" George smiled. Daniel nodded. "Yes. But this time I'm not walking. I just needed to sit." George studied him for a moment. "You look tired. Not in your body, tired in your soul." Daniel sighed. "I've been pushing myself. Trying to improve, trying to succeed. But now I feel pressure to keep going, and it's heavy." George put down his brush. "Listen, my friend. Growth is not only about running forward. Sometimes growth means stopping to breathe. Balance is part of strength." Those words felt like a calm wind in Daniel's stormy mind. That evening, Daniel wrote in his notebook, "Balance is strength. Rest is not weakness. To fight myself, I must also take care of myself." So he began a new habit, slowing down. He still walked in the mornings, but some days he walked slowly, without rushing. He still read books, but sometimes he simply sat quietly and watched the sky. He still worked hard, but he allowed himself to rest without guilt. It was not easy. The voice inside sometimes said, "You're wasting time. You're falling behind." But another voice answered, "Rest is part of the fight. Even warriors need to breathe." One evening, Daniel visited his sister Anna again. She noticed the calm but serious look on his face. "You're different," she said. "Happier, but also thoughtful. What's going on?" Daniel explained everything, the pressure, the doubt, the lesson about balance. Anna smiled. "I'm glad you're learning this. I used to think being strong meant never stopping. But then I realized my kids don't need a perfect mother. They need a healthy one. Maybe people don't need you to be perfect either. They just need you to be present." Her words touched Daniel deeply. He realized that true strength wasn't about being flawless. It was about being real. In the following weeks, Daniel felt a different kind of energy. He wasn't chasing perfection anymore. He was learning to enjoy small things again, sunsets, laughter, simple meals, music on the radio. He discovered that joy and growth live together. Without joy, growth feels like punishment. With joy, growth feels like life. One night, he wrote in his notebook, "I don't want just success. I want peace. I don't want just progress. I want joy. And I can have both if I learn balance." At work, one of his younger colleagues said, "Daniel, how do you stay so calm under pressure?" "I get nervous all the time." Daniel was surprised. Calm? Him? He had always seen himself as the nervous one. But then he realized, his quiet battles had given him a quiet strength. He smiled and replied, "I'm not always calm. I just remind myself that fear is normal, and rest is important. Don't be too hard on yourself." For the first time, Daniel wasn't just learning, he was teaching. And that made him feel even stronger. That night, Daniel looked at his notebook filled with months of thoughts, promises, and lessons. He whispered to himself, "You versus you is not just about fighting laziness or fear. It is also about fighting pressure, doubt, and the need to be perfect. True victory is balance, strength with peace, growth with joy." He closed his notebook, smiled softly, and felt grateful. The battle was not over, but he was learning how to fight in a new way. The months passed, and Daniel's life looked different. His habits were stronger, his health was better, and his confidence had grown. But the biggest change was invisible, it lived in his mind and heart. For years, Daniel had believed he was weak. Now, he knew the truth, he had always been strong. He simply had to fight himself to discover it. At work, the company celebrated the success of their recent projects. Daniel was invited to speak in front of the team. He stood at the front of the room, nervous but steady. His voice was calm as he shared, "I used to doubt myself. I thought I wasn't good enough. But this year taught me something important. The biggest battle is not against other people. It's against yourself, your fears, your excuses, your doubts. And every time you face them, you grow stronger." The room filled with quiet respect. People nodded, some even smiled with encouragement. For Daniel, it wasn't about applause. It was about speaking his truth out loud. That weekend, Daniel visited the park again and found George sitting under a tree, reading. "Ah, Daniel." George greeted warmly. "You look different. Stronger." Daniel laughed softly. "I feel different. I've been fighting myself all these months. It's been hard, but also worth it." George closed his book. "So, tell me. Who won, the old you, or the new you?" Daniel thought for a moment. Then he smiled. "Neither. They became one. I am still me, but a better version. I don't need to erase the old me. I just need to guide him." George's eyes sparkled. "Wise words. You've learned the real secret. It's not about destroying yourself. It's about transforming yourself." One evening, Daniel sat at his desk, holding his notebook filled with hundreds of pages. Each page carried his battles, his doubts, his victories, his lessons. He decided to write one final message on the last page: "The fight is never over. But I am not afraid. Because now I know the truth, the enemy was never outside. It was always me. And now, I am my own best friend. This is victory." He closed the notebook gently, as if it were a treasure. Because it was. Weeks later, Daniel was invited by his boss to mentor new employees. At first, he felt unsure. Could he guide others when he was still learning himself? But then he remembered, he didn't need to be perfect to help. He only needed to be honest, so he shared small lessons: write your goals down. Take small steps every day. Don't fear mistakes, they are part of the road. Be patient with yourself. Growth takes time. The younger employees listened carefully. For Daniel, this was a new kind of joy, turning his fight into light for others. One Sunday afternoon, Daniel visited Anna and her family. Her children ran to him, laughing, and he felt warmth in his heart. Anna watched him play with them and said, "You've really changed, Daniel. You smile more now. You seem lighter." Daniel nodded. "I feel lighter. I used to carry fear and doubt everywhere. Now, I still carry them sometimes, but they don't control me anymore." Anna hugged him. "I'm proud of you." And for once, Daniel didn't argue or doubt. He simply accepted the words. One early morning, Daniel woke before the sunrise. He tied his shoes and stepped outside. The air was cool, fresh, alive. As he walked, he thought about the long road he had traveled, the nights of doubt, the mornings of strength, the lessons of balance. And then, as the sun rose slowly in the sky, he whispered to himself, "You versus you. I thought it was a war. But it's really a journey. I don't need to destroy the old me. I just need to guide him into the light." The sunlight touched his face, warm and gentle. And in that moment, Daniel felt peace. Daniel's journey was not perfect. He still had fears. He still had days of weakness. But now, he had something stronger, the knowledge that he could rise again, no matter how many times he fell. The fight of you versus you would never end. But Daniel was no longer afraid, because he had learned that inside him lived both the challenge and the victory. And every day, he chose to win. Thank you for listening to this story, You versus You, the journey of becoming your best self. Remember, the biggest battle is not against the world, or against other people. The biggest battle is inside, between the part of you that wants to give up and the part of you that wants to grow. Some days, you will win. Some days, you will fall. But every day, you have the chance to rise again. Be patient with yourself. Be kind to yourself. And never forget, every small step forward is still progress. Because at the end of the day, it is always you versus you. And the choice to win is yours. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring English stories.